Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. My name is Lisa Gear, and I'm the Dean of Admissions here at Southwestern. If you've been to one of our spotlights before, then you will get an opportunity to also ask your questions of our guests tonight. We will also have two current students in the chat. They both serve as admissions ambassadors, and they are here to answer questions that you might have from a current student perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves, and then we will get started with our program. So Fabiola, would you like to go first?
Hi, everyone. My name is Fabiola. I am now a rising 3L. So exciting. And so I'll be here in the chat to answer your questions. So yeah, let us know if you need to know anything.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Armand, also rising 3L, the managing editor of Law Journal and teaching assistant for the first year writing course. So feel free to ask questions.
Thank you, Fabiola and Armand. So the gentleman of the hour is a distinguished alum of Southwestern, and I consider a good friend as well. He's done a lot of admissions programs with us over the years, and we're happy to have you back, Michael. We'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself to the group.
Thanks, Lisa. Nice to meet you all virtually. I'm Michael Morse, obviously, as my little label indicates. I graduated in 2013. I currently work for the Department of Justice as a federal prosecutor. Specifically, I'm an assistant United States attorney in what we call the Central District of California, which basically means I work out of the Los Angeles office.
Great, thank you, Michael. So I remember, that you had mentioned, and I think we included a little bit about this on the invitation for tonight's event, that one of the reasons why you decided you want to go to law school was you were really excited at the idea of doing things like jury trials. So can you take us all the way back to when you were thinking about law school, and what were some of the things that, sort of drew you to that future career path? And what were some of the ways that you explored opportunities to kind of reinforce and explore that interest of yours?
Yeah, sure. So the law and law school was sort of like a second career for me. I started law school the day after my 30th birthday. So before I went to law school, I was working for a bank and making decent money, relatively speaking. And I had a good friend of mine who was a victim of a violent crime, and it caused me to interact with law enforcement, specifically like detectives, and kind of introduced me to the criminal justice system in that context. I went and watched a criminal trial, basically from start to finish. And I came away from that experience believing that the jury trial process, specifically in a criminal trial context or criminal case context, was very impactful and important and meaningful. And I felt like the job that I was doing at that time was the opposite of those things. Although it was very important in terms of people's money, but it didn't really have, I didn't get the sense of reward that I thought that a career ought to provide. So I decided I was going to go to law school. I went back to school, finished up my bachelor's, and then applied to law school. Fortunate enough to be admitted to Southwestern. And I knew when I was at law school, when I first started, that I wanted to be a prosecutor. And initially that was my focus, but then as I began to take some courses from the very talented criminal faculty staff at Southwestern, as we read cases, because law schools is substantially sort of based on a case book format where you read facts of real cases and sort of analyze those cases in the way that the reviewing courts are analyzing them. I found myself sort of always rooting for the accused, if you will. So I kind of rediscovered a defense streak, and then quickly waffled and decided I wanted to become a public defender, which is a court-appointed criminal attorney for indigent clients. In other words, people who cannot afford an attorney. So also a government attorney who does jury trials in a criminal context, but on the other side as a defender. I got a chance to work with one of our outstanding criminal law faculty members, Professor Carpenter. I was her research assistant and focused on some of the sort of constitutional issues that she was writing about at the time. And I decided at that point that I knew I wanted to do criminal law, and I was going to sort of focus my experience in terms of extracurricular activities. In other words, things that I could control, because your first year of law school is kind of, your schedule is kind of done for you because there are certain required courses you have to take. So I decided that I was going to the extent that I had control over some things, like what professors I would be research assistant for, what classes I would be a teaching assistant for, or at least apply for. I decided that all of those positions would be, in terms of what I was focused on, would be criminal law related. So I was a research assistant for Professor Carpenter. I was fortunate enough to later be a teaching assistant in a class that's called Evidence, which is very criminal trial focused. It's a course that focuses on to what extent and when certain evidence and testimony is appropriate to come before a jury in a criminal trial. So I was a teaching assistant for that course. At the end of my first year of law school, which is a landmark year for most law students, because the first year is kind of the toughest and the most exciting, just because everything's so brand new. Most students will do an externship or an internship the first year. When they're done with their first year, they'll go into summer internships. I applied for the public defender's office because at that point, that's what I wanted to be. The public defender's office did not call me back. And so I ended up trying out for a trial advocacy honors program. Southwestern has, you all may know this, but we have what are called our honors programs. There's a negotiations honors program, which is more focused on sort of transactional work, things that attorneys are involved in terms of negotiating contracts and things like that. And there's also a moot court honors program, which is based on appellate practice. So getting your feet wet and arguing before mock panels of judges in an appellate context. And then there's the trial advocacy honors program, which is what I decided that I wanted to be a part of because that most closely resembled what I wanted to do, which was be a trial lawyer. I tried out for that program. And at the end of that tryout process, I met a person who was then and is now the co-director of that program. And he happened to be very high up at the DA's office. At the time, he asked me what I was doing this summer. I told him that the public defender's office didn't call me back. And he said, well, you're going to work for me. And I said, okay, problem solved. So I reluctantly started clerking at the DA's office because by that time I was a diehard public defender, future public defender in my mind. And I enjoyed it quite a bit. I wasn't sure if my supervisor felt the same about my performance, but she ended up inviting me back the next semester. And I began to work with her pretty closely at the DA's office. I ended up being on the trial advocacy honors program that I talked about before when I was trying out, which was just an excellent program because you really get a chance, if you want to be a trial lawyer or if you want to be, if you want to focus on appellate stuff or even negotiations. What's great about the honors programs at Southwestern is that the coaches who are essentially working very hands-on, hand in hand with the students are themselves alumni and practicing attorneys. So you're able to glean from them sort of their practice habits and their advice. And oftentimes you will be fortunate enough to have them as mentors. So I ended up having a lot of mentors who were trial attorneys, and specifically deputy district attorneys. And they took an interest in me, which I was very happy to find out. And I learned a ton from them. So I began to continue clerking at the DA's office. And so I clerked the first summer, and then a couple of times after that, after my 2L year, I clerked again for another summer. And I got an opportunity to do a jury trial as a law student. The DA's office at that time and still has a program whereby law students can be what they call certified law clerks. So they can go on the record and appear in court and even appear in jury trials in certain circumstances. And I was lucky enough to do a jury trial as a law student. My sort of rising 3L year, as they call it. So I'd already done 2 years. I was going into my third year. And, my colleagues were studying abroad in London and having a blast, and I was prepping a jury trial I'm not sure who got the better end of that stick, but in any event, it was a great experience. I got to argue in front of a real jury, like you see on TV. And case went all the way to verdict, participated in jury selection. And the DA that I worked with in that particular trial, I was just so impressed by his integrity and the way that he approached the case. It was not what I sort of thought the avatar of DAs that I had, seeking the conviction, all costs, that kind of perspective that I had. He kind of unraveled that for me. And I began to appreciate the good that could be done on that end of things, that end being the prosecutor's end. But nevertheless, after that externship, I decided I was still going to try out the defense side of things. So I ended up clerking at the ACLU, which is a civil rights organization, essentially. And I worked inside of what they call the Jails Project. At the time, the ACLU was basically a court-appointed watchdog for the LA County jail system that at the time was accused of many sort of civil rights allegations or abuses and neglect and so on of inmates. And so in that capacity, I got a chance to go visit inmates who were incarcerated, discuss with them the treatment that they were experiencing with a great deal of autonomy. I was going to jail alone as a law student on my day off when I didn't have class. I would drive into the jail, get out and go into the attorney room. And my role obviously was not to represent these folks, but it was to basically discuss with them what their case was about in sort of an intake capacity. But that was incredibly insightful for me, who would later be a prosecutor, because I got a chance to talk to people who were incarcerated and the experiences that they were having there. And so I thought it gave me a great insight into sort of what, the weight of the work and in terms of the criminal justice system. After that, I clerked for the public defender's office. They finally called me back, and ended up working for them. I made great relationships with folks at the PD's office, and all the while I was also participating in the trial advocacy honors program, which caused me to go to trial competitions and travel with teammates. And aside from the interface that I got with practitioners and alumni and coaches, I also got a chance to get pretty close with my teammates who were on that team. We formed some pretty great bonds, and those are the people that I still keep in contact with today. And we still chat about, good old days and discuss cases. One of them helped me get my first job. So the bond that was sort of built and on that battlefield of mock trial was long lasting. So that's another thing that I think that really helped me career-wise. After law school, I wanted to be a trial lawyer. Specifically, I wanted to be a prosecutor, but more than anything, I wanted a job. So I applied for the public defender's office and the DA's office. But truthfully, I could have been a PD and been perfectly happy with it if that's how things had turned out. DA's office called me, and essentially the interview process was almost a year long for both of these offices. Hired me eventually. I was going to start on a Wednesday. True to form, the public defender's office calls me on a Monday and says, "Oh, you're hired." And I'm like, "But I already have a job with the DA's office." So ended up going to the DA's office, worked there for about 6 years. And I don't know if you want me to go any further, but that's kind of how I that's what I focused on in law school. And that's how I sort of ended up as a prosecutor.
I think there was a lot of serendipity in your story. You were definitely meant, I think, for a certain path. You just kept trying that public defender's route, and you just kind of kept edging away. Well, I have some more questions, but does anybody in the audience have any questions for Michael at this point? You want to raise your real hand? Okay, Natalie, I see you. Go ahead.
Michael, how did you transition from your everyday, regular life to law school?
Well, see, for me, law school was a blast. And not that it wasn't difficult, it was the most academically grueling experience I've ever had. And, it was just, it was very difficult. But when I say it was a blast, I mean, I was coming from a 9-to-5 job where there was a specific sort of delineated, compartmentalized task. And so I thought it was great to be able to sit in class, in casual clothes and to pontificate or to discuss like big picture public policy issues, and to interact with my classmates who had such a varied background. So while law school was difficult, the transition, on the whole, I enjoyed it, but I will say it was grueling because, I was in class from, I don't know, I want to say like 8:45, 9 a.m. it feels like, until maybe 3:30. That's when class was over, with like an hour and a half break. And then after that, I took my books and, friends that I had accumulated, and we went in the study rooms, and we would study till about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And depending on what was going on in that particular course, I may go home and study. So it, while I preferred that over sort of the 9 to 5 traditional, working world, the hours were much, much longer. So that was an adjustment, because you don't just clock out of law school, which is appropriate, because you don't just clock out of being an attorney. After we finish talking and after this event, I'm going back to work. So that's the reality. I was at work yesterday. It's not always like that. Don't worry, it depends on the kind of law that you practice. But suffice to say that, you don't really just clock out of being an attorney. So it was a good preview for that. The adjustment was, it was definitely, it was definitely a change of pace. But again, I enjoyed it. I thought that the classes were very engaging. I thought the environment was very welcoming, and I thought that my colleagues were very collegial, and which again was sort of a pleasant surprise, because I had heard about, law students and law schools being very competitive to the point that, it's they say cutthroat. I didn't find that to be the case by and large at Southwestern. There's different types of people in any kind of institution, but for the most part, I found a lot of like teamwork and camaraderie, and people who were interested in building and learning from each other. And so it was not a hostile environment to have those type of hours, the way that it probably could have been if the environment wasn't so sort of welcoming and conducive to learning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Did anybody else have any questions? Mario.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Michael. Really, really interesting story. Can you speak more about how you ended up clerking at the ACLU? Because, the best laid schemes of mice and men go askew, but ACLU is kind of my dream job. That's the aim after law school.
Yeah, the ACLU was a great organization. I learned a lot. So I got referred to the ACLU by one of my colleagues, who happened to know someone who worked there, and that's kind of how this thing works in terms of getting jobs, right? So what I usually tell people is who are in law school or considering or they are embarking in law school is be good to your colleagues, and they'll be good to you, hopefully, because you're going to need each other. It's a small profession, small world. And so I ended up learning of the position from one of my law school colleagues who knew one of the attorneys who worked at the ACLU. So I got in contact with the recruiter who was handling this particular position, and wrote her a cover letter explaining sort of what my interest was in this work. The ACLU is an organization that very much is interested in who you are as a person. They want to, I think that, it's one of those organizations where they want to know that you're there for the mission. So, at that point, having clerked at the DA's office multiple times, having had a personal history, and we've all got our personal history and experience and background that we sort of bring to the table. So having some knowledge of the criminal justice system in that sense, and I had also clerked, or I've been a research assistant for the criminal law faculty professor that I was discussing earlier. So I had some demonstrated sort of interest in the area. So I was able to write them a cover letter that apparently convinced them of that. And I came in for an interview, and the lady who I still talk to every now and then, Esther Lim, she hired me, and she made me one of her jail law clerks who would go to the LA County jails and interview folks. And so that's how I ended up there. Obviously ACLU, it's an organization, it's very competitive, but it's well worth the effort, I think, because I came away very impressed with that organization and the work that they do. And you may know that eventually their work at the LA County jail system led to a lot of uncovering of corruption that was going on at the LA County jail, and it led to the indictment of Sheriff Lee Baca by the office that I now work for. And so a lot of full circle type stuff there. But yeah, that's how I ended up at the ACLU.
Thank you so much. Really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's touch upon that a little bit. Can you describe for the group a little bit, like an overview of the differences between the types of cases you might have seen in the DA's office versus now at the Department of Justice?
Sure. So when I worked at the DA's office and the state or county local public defender's office, they deal with the cases that you might see on Dateline or Forensic Files or like those forensic shows, the murders, assaults, gun shootings. They do some fraud type stuff, and they do some prosecutions around corruption of public officials, but for the most part, they are your sort of meat and potatoes kind of prosecutors. If some crime were to occur, pretty much, any crime you can think of, for the most part, it would fall under their jurisdiction, which is a state and local jurisdiction. So at the DA's office, I started out prosecuting the sort of less serious cases, so like petty thefts, DUIs, which obviously can be very serious depending on the circumstances, but they're misdemeanors, misdemeanor domestic violence cases, everything where one is subjected to less than a year of jail time if they're convicted. Those are called misdemeanors. After a couple of years, I started working on felony cases, which are like robbery, more serious cases involving violence, more serious cases like involving domestic violence and shootings, and I handled gang murders and all different kinds of types of murders. And then I started prosecuting in our juvenile division, where I was just prosecuting juvenile cases. And I ended up, before I left the DA's office, I was in our, it's kind of like an SVU unit, if you all watched that show. So it was basically domestic violence, sex crimes, crimes against children, and elder abuse. So I did that for the last couple of years that I was at the DA's office. And, those crimes are what they sound like, right? Ended up going to the Department of Justice, where I am now. We're federal prosecutors, so we prosecute cases that fall under federal jurisdiction. So the cases that we look at are more likely to be sort of larger scale fraud. For example, as opposed to prosecuting the person dealing the drugs on the corner, we'll probably go after the doctor who's maybe writing the script. We have cases with sort of international significance, national security cases. If there's a terror attack or something like that, it'll be prosecuted by the Department of Justice. Cases that involve crimes that go interstate, so multi sort of state criminal organizations that are operating in multiple states. International sorts of crimes with people who are importing drugs. Think of like cartels, stuff like that. Those are the types of crimes that we prosecute on the federal level. The cases take a lot longer to sort of resolve. They are investigated much more thoroughly. That old saying, don't make a federal case out of this. So our case, that means to say, like, there's just a lot that goes into a federal case. So usually the feds are like watching you for a couple of years before they indict you, versus the DA's office where, a police officer arrests you and then they file a case against you. So more fraud, more very large scale sort of drug cases, interstate cases, and cases sort of involving national security and terror and that type of stuff. That's what you would get on the federal side of things. But it's kind of an analog to the state system in that you also have a federal public defender for clients who can't afford to pay for a retained counsel. And so there's a lot of similarities, but the venue is different, and the cases tend to be a little bit more, complex. Not to say that a murder or any other type of cases don't get complex, because they're very complex. They can be very emotional and so on. But complex in that there's more documents, there's more investigation involved, more witnesses, and you're working with like federal agents. So, FBI, DEA, Secret Service. Those are the agencies and the police investigators that I'm working with. The DA's office, it was LAPD, Sheriff's Department, and local law enforcement who would, pull you over and write you a ticket.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, we have a couple questions coming in the chat. So first is Paulina's, and then we'll go to Danilo. So Paulina's asking, how did you deal with the psychological toll of working on such crimes?
So I'll say this before I get into sort of my progression through that. My observation is that it's not the case that the practitioners within these systems, that is criminal defense lawyers and prosecutors, it's not the case that they are so impacted, or that the danger of working in these areas is that you'll be so, emotionally sort of affected by the cases. Although there are some cases that are very, stay with you, especially if someone loses their life or there's very, something like that. But I find that most, the danger is being callous after a while, right? You're more likely, or practitioners are more likely to be sort of less feeling than maybe they should be with these cases over time. And that's because, you're dealing with, albeit very serious subject matter, but you're dealing with it sort of repetitively. So, the danger is that if it gets to be just a file on your desk, right? When this is like someone's life, someone's been accused of a crime, someone, has been victimized and so on. So having said that, my journey into the criminal justice system in terms of like being a lawyer in it had to do with a personal experience that I had with a friend who was a victim of a crime. So, I just sort of, my focus as a professional and as a practitioner is obviously the objective of doing whatever needs to be done in the case, but also remembering that there are people involved in these cases, and that the system that I'm in, the criminal justice system, it's like a hospital. The courthouses are like a hospital. No one wants to be there. No one wants to even have to be visiting someone there, right? So it's serious stuff. Obviously, it's kind of the reverse of what you're asking, because you're saying, how did you, not get too emotionally tied in? And I'm telling you how I try to stay tied in a little bit. And that's just because, as an attorney, your job is it's almost mechanical. You're looking at, and this all happen to you. I mean, law school's going to ruin how you listen to things, in a good way, I think. But you're going to be listening to information in a more sort of format, structured way within a prism of the law. And so when you're reading cases and talking to people, you're not really listening in sort of the way that you may listen to your friend. You're listening as has this element been met? What crime has occurred? What problems of proof may exist? Or if you're a public defender, maybe the prosecution can't prove their case. So just because the role is kind of a mechanical one in some ways, I think that distracts from some of the how gripping these cases can be, and how they could impact you so emotionally. So, I that's how I look at cases. And then on the other hand, I do try to keep in mind that, these are people, and this is usually it's an unfortunate event in any event, right? So that's kind of how I keep my head on with some of the stuff. But look, some of it still affects you. I still have cases I remember that I worked at the DA's office. I have some victims I still keep in contact with, or their family members, right? So I mean, it's personal in some ways. It can be, when you get to know some of these folks. But as lawyers, it can't be personal. We have to make sure we keep our impartiality, especially in my role as a prosecutor. I have to try to focus on whatever the truth may be, and that requires that I kind of take a step back as I do my job, but still try to treat people like people and remember that there are people involved in this case.
Thank you for that, Michael. That's a really important distinction, to actually really stay invested in your cases as opposed to removing yourself. Okay, I think Danilo had a question next.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. A little lighter here, but in hearing your story and really the part about switching from a 9 to 5 and going into more impactful work. And you described some of the people really, they were almost like harrowing expectations of how difficult law school was going to be. So if I can just pick your brain with what's one solid piece of advice for someone making that transition to second career, from like you said, from going 9 to 5 to the intensity of law school. What's one piece you would leave us all with in that situation?
I'd say that I leave you with some good news. I think that you have an advantage in some ways. When you're coming from, you have a background of having dealt with sort of, office politics, having dealt with sort of the logistics of doing a job. And if this is your second career, you're coming with probably some wealth of life experience. And I think that the law is about real life. And to the extent that you have some background, that you have some insight into life outside of the academic setting, then I think it can be a great advantage for you to kind of read between the lines of whatever academic, assignment you may have and try to see the bigger picture. But my advice to you, aside from what I think is the good news, is, I think that one of the main thing you're going to want to do when you get out of law school is, well, pass the bar, right? Okay, so after you pass the bar, the next thing you're going to want to do is get a job. And so, as I've kind of alluded to before, getting a job sometimes is something that your colleagues can be very helpful in helping you get. So I would say in law school, especially if you're coming from a second career, but in any event, yes, be focused on the work, be dialed in, be the person who knows the answers, be reliable in terms of your work ethic, but also don't be so overwhelmed by that you're really treating people poorly, and that you are competitive to the extent that people aren't going to want to work around you. And in other words, want you in their world, right? Because a lot of times when you get out of law school and you pass the bar, you want a job, you need somebody to refer you. It's just like getting a job at Best Buy, it turns out, or whatever other business that you may get a job at. Somebody has to say, hey, Michael really knows his stuff and he's a good colleague. People aren't going to want just one of those two things, right? It doesn't matter what kind of how gregarious and how room worker I am in a working setting. If I'm not good at what I do, then no one's going to want to put their name on my recommendation. And the converse of that, if I'm the most qualified person in my class, I'm the number one in my class, but I treat people really terribly, it's going to be probably tough for me not only to get the first job, although my credentials may get me there, sort of sight unseen, but it's going to be difficult to excel in that job and to probably keep that job, right? So I think that one should be focused on being good at what they do and also being good to people, because you can't have one without the other. And obviously you can't be perfect on all levels. You can't be the most popular person in the world. And, you may not be the number one person in your class. But if you're competent in both of those things, both people and the work, I think that you'll be all right. So I guess I'd say don't be so sucked into the academic rigor that you miss the bigger picture of the people around you. And that's probably something that's going to apply to you. That's the same advice that I would have to you, or similar advice in actually being a lawyer.
It's really helpful, and thank you for the good news. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. We all need some, right?
Okay, next will be Victoria.
Thank you so much. I would love to hear more about the unique experience that you think you were able to get at Southwestern, whether that was through the faculty or the community there, or just being in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so my experience at Southwestern was one where, as I said, my colleagues were obviously, in any law school or any type of environment, you'll be entering in as an attorney or law school or what have you, there's some level of competition, right? You want to be recognized or you want to do a good job. So I'm not going to say there wasn't any competition at all. Obviously there was, but there was a lot of collegiality. There was sharing of something as simple as sharing with class notes, something as simple as teaching you a concept or someone teaching me a concept that I didn't really understand. I raised my hand in class and it's clear that I didn't really maybe get it. And having a colleague say, hey, you want to come study with us, and then getting the concept after explained. That type of experience led me to kind of believe that me and my colleagues were kind of in this together. And I felt the same thing with the faculty. It's very open door policy. I didn't get a sense that they were looking to make mini me's out of their students, if you know what I mean. So it didn't seem like they wanted us to just regurgitate their thoughts and ideas. It seemed like that they wanted us to question even the thoughts and the ideas that they were putting forth. And that made it more comfortable to interact with them, like in office hours or elsewhere, because it didn't seem like some sort of like, it didn't seem contrived at all. It felt more organic. And some of the professors that I teach some adjunct courses here at Southwestern still. And one of the reasons why is because I even after law school, I kept in contact with my professors who I thought, took an interest and were very helpful towards me. And that kind of led to working with the school a little bit. But that sort of combination of colleagues and professors that I felt really wanted to see me succeed made me feel like I had the springboard I needed to sort of do well. And I'll tell you that, once you finish your first year of law school and you're doing intern type work, we call it externship work because you're getting credit for it. And you begin to interact with other students from other law schools, very highly ranked law schools in some cases. And I'm sitting around with them at lunch and they're just like telling me how much they hate their life and they hate law school and they're questioning it. And I'm just like looking around the table, like, actually, I don't feel that way. Like, I think this is kind of cool. And in talking to them about their experiences with their colleagues I found that Southwestern was kind of unique in this world. And I sort of say like, I kind of came from a happy home. So I was like ready to go. And they were just like, not all of them. A lot of people did enjoy their schools as well. But I noticed that like, I didn't have that sort of general refrain that almost got to be the cool thing to say. Like, I hate law school. It's so taking over my life. I'd be like, yeah, cool. Me too. But in my mind, I'm like, no, I actually really like this. Right. So I think that that's an experience that I got at Southwestern that I think is unique. It's why I'm talking to y'all here. Right. I mean, and it's why Southwestern has a ton of participation from alum, which is rearing to go and ready to talk to people and like yourselves about how much they like the school. Because they feel like school helped them in some ways. And so they're excited about it.
Thank you for your question, Victoria. Okay, a couple more in the chat. I'm going to try to see if I can summarize some of these. So Brian was asking about with some of the cases that you dealt with, did you ever feel like you were in danger? And then coupled with James's question on, can you give a little bit of a summary on what the average day in the DAs looks like versus how much that may have changed in the DOJ?
Sure. So regarding did I ever feel in danger, the answer is yes. Only because, I mean, look, the reality is I can't speak for public defenders or defense counsel, but in my particular position, prosecutors are less likely to be, attacked or have some violent encounter with even someone they're prosecuting, only because we're so fungible. If somebody does something to me, there's going to be an email is going to go out, and then somebody's going to pick up that case and continue to prosecute it. So there's really no value in doing anything to me. It's more about like witnesses. If anything, I've more often like feared for the safety of my witnesses because if something happens to them that does impact the case, right? So we have like witness relocation and all kinds of stuff in times of my career where I felt that way. It's a little bit different as a defense attorney because sometimes clients do get upset at their defense lawyers. But for me personally, it's something that you think anything can happen. But I really have never had an instance where I felt like I was super uncomfortable. But I used to prosecute in the city where I live, unfortunately. And so every now and then I'd run into someone like at Ralph's who'd say, I saw you at the courthouse. And I'm like, you sure it was me? Okay. So that was, those felt, but then, nothing ever happened. So yeah, I mean, I think that anything's possible and one is aware of that. But for the most part, I haven't had any serious concerns about my safety. It's more about the people around the cases. I'm sorry, what was the second question? Oh, my day-to-day at the DA's office versus the federal office. Okay, so the DAs are more in court. They're in court every single day almost. They're having hearings. It's more on your feet. It's there's less like written work at the DA's office. There's less motions. It's what we call law in motion practice, is when you're like sitting behind a computer and filing things. There's less of that at the DA's office. It's much more dynamic. And you're in court probably maybe the whole day, or at least half the day. The U.S. Attorney's Office in federal practice, there's much more law in motion practice. The volume is much lower in terms of actual number of cases that we have. So we have more time to work on them, but because they're more complex, it kind of all balances out in terms of the work. But the practical effect is that I'm in court much less. I'm in court maybe once a week nowadays, versus the DA's office. I'd be in court every single day. And I'm writing a lot more versus the DA's office, where I might just write only if I had like a trial brief that I needed to write.
Oh, great questions, guys. Okay, so we only have time for really one more question. Does anybody have one that they'd like to ask? I saw some in the chat, but is anybody brave enough to ask? Shilpa.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to ask my question. I heard you say something earlier, Mr. Morse, that you had a 9-to-5 routine before. So I'm just assuming that this was for a job. So if it was for a job, I guess you quit your job and then went to school. So I want to know how that financial journey was for you. What helped you, and then did you graduate with a law school debt afterwards?
I think everybody graduates with a law school debt. So let's not put them on the spot too much.
So how did Southwestern help, and what type of programs did you take advantage of at Southwestern?
Yeah, sure. Right, absolutely. No, I was laughing at the thought of my debt, not at your question. So Southwestern has a tremendous financial aid team that helps you through and walks through your specific sort of situation. You know, some people are living at home, so maybe they'll need a lot less assistance. Some folks are out on their own and, you know, basically responsible for like their life, right? And so they'll need more assistance. There's also scholarships as well, that there are merit scholarships and others that one can qualify for, even if you don't kind of get one on the front end, you know, based on your performance in school. There's financial assistance that comes from that as well. So where there's a will, there's a way to kind of make it work. And especially because you have, you know, the financial aid team who's kind of seen it all, every situation, can help tailor something for you, for your specific sort of, you know, situation. I'm in the public service role, so luckily my loans are in theory going to be forgiven like pretty soon, because it's a 10-year program. That's what exists now, right? And so the financial aid office avails you, makes you aware of the different programs that you may qualify for. So they say, hey, Michael, you're interested in being a DA. Think about this public service loan forgiveness program. Factor that into the decisions that you make in law school and elsewhere. And so that kind of help you set up a plan based on what your aspirations are and what your financial situation is, living situation, and so on. But it's doable. It's totally doable.
Yeah, for those that are not familiar, there's a federal level public loan forgiveness program that if you put in the years, they'll help you out there. So nobody, you're not counting the minutes though, are you, Michael? How many more minutes left?
You know, 10 years.
A little bit. Okay, well, I think we are really just about out of time, but I just wanted to give Michael one more last opportunity. If there was any other tidbit that you'd want to share about maybe something, I know you did a lot while you were in law school, and it really paid off. Is there something you wish you were more mindful of when you were in school that you know, kind of looking back, have that crystal clear vision on, or some activity that you wished you had participated in or did more of while you were in school?
So I'll tell you the things that I feel like I did well in, or that I'm happy I made that decision. And then something that I wish that I had sort of known coming in. I made the decision kind of coming into law school. And again, this kind of goes back to my having experienced maybe a job that I didn't think was as rewarding. I decided that I was going to do only the things that I was like interested in and that I was passionate about, because I felt like I'd be good at those things and I feel like they'd be the most rewarding. So I didn't go after the most prestigious this or that, you know, I went after what I thought I was very interested in. I didn't just become a TA of a class because I got a high grade in that particular class. I asked, well, do I care about this particular subject to the extent where I'm going to be excited about it and be useful both to the professor and to the school? And, you know, is it going to interest me? That was my bottom line. So I felt like I'd be good if I was interested in it. So for me, it was criminal law. For y'all, it may be something different, or your interest may be trying out different things, and that's great too. But I do think that you need to kind of follow your interests. And I think, you know, whatever you're looking for will sort of come, whether it's money, success, or, you know, accolades, whatever it is, or if it's, you know, mastery of a certain area of the law, that will come so long as you're interested in it. And it's very important to be a happy lawyer, not to just be a lawyer, because there's some people who are just a lawyer. and you know, that's not worth it for you, because it takes a lot of time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears to get where you are now and to go further, right? And to do all of that and to be at the end of the line and think, you know, this job doesn't really interest me. I decided that I was not going to have that result. That doesn't mean that there aren't days, weeks where I'm like, oh man, you know, it's a job like anything else. But so I think I focus on the things that interest me, and I would say that you should do that. On the other end of that, I think coming into law school is intimidating, you know? So there's a lot of smart people that you're going to be surrounded by at some point when you come to law school. And well-spoken people and articulate people, and seem to have like a mental Rolodex of just random knowledge. And so, you know, you can say, oh, do I belong here? This person looks like they're going to get the A. You know, I'm done. I can't compete with that. And I tell you that I wouldn't listen to any of that, because, you know, you never really know how things are going to shake out. And just because something sounds a certain way, it's not always that way. And I'd say that look at the long game, you know, so try to fight that imposter syndrome sense if you have it. If you find yourself in that position at law school, if you find yourself in the position that you're the smartest person in the room, please fight that also, because because that will be obvious that that's how you feel. But I think for the most part, most folks can be taken aback by how thoughtful and how like impressive everyone is, you know, from the professors to the teachers to your colleagues. So I would say resist that feeling or inclination or that insecurity, and understand that you're there for a reason, right? And you are, you know, capable and competent, and really you can do something that no one else can do, which is bring yourself to the practice or to the study. And so I try to keep in mind that it's a really long game, right? It's not just this class. It's how things turn out are kind of undetermined, but try to run your race. You know, there's people running alongside of you, but focus on your race. You know, offer some assistance to your left and to your right, but don't be distracted by where people appear to be vis-a-vis yourself, because, you know, it's a long sort of journey, and who knows how it'll turn out, but focus on what you're doing.
That's great advice. Thank you, Michael. I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you, Michael, for all the wisdom that you shared tonight. Thank you to our guests for joining and for asking your great questions. We hope you found the event to be helpful and, of course, inspiring, as I can only imagine you all are. I'm always inspired, and I've heard Michael speak before about his journey, but I think it's such a fantastic one. And maybe one day you'll still make it back to the public defender's office.
Never say never.
Never say never. Okay. Good night, everyone. Be safe and be well. Take care.
Take care.